Hello and welcome. This is Wholeness, a quantum experience. And we're doing something a little bit different today. So we have Ute on. So hi, Ute.
Hi.
And so I really wanted to have her on for this non-traditional podcast. We are going to have her on for our typical wholeness interview, but we're going to have her today because I really wanted to have a conversation and also share my story around my two cats and their experience of death and my experience of grieving. And I also just want to say, for those of you who are not animal people or pet people, like, I encourage you to stick with it because it's not just about animals. Like, there's a lot more medicine here. And I just also, to give you a little background, and I'll let her also speak about herself if she wants, but gosh, I guess I've had you in my life for a couple years now, and she knows me and my pets very well, the ones that are living and not living, and has just really walked a lot of, especially their like death and dying journeys with me. And I've like tried, I think, all of her offerings at this point. She has a beautiful menu of modalities and things that she offers. And so I just couldn't think of anybody else that I wanted to have this conversation with. So if you want to say anything before we like dig in.
No, you're doing a beautiful job. I can speak when you want me to speak, so I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so to start, I'm gonna try to keep this part quick because it's not the juicy part of the conversation. But I want to start by sharing that I was not always an animal lover. Like, I have shifted so much to come into this version of me. And when I think back to being like a kid, I really like to look for like tree frogs or like the more like, I don't know, just like slimy creatures or like I always wanted to learn about like manatees and crocodiles and alligators, like things like that. But like cats and dogs, I was okay not having those around, especially cats actually, because I would sneeze or I'd get welts on my skin and I was like, I don't want to be around this. And I just thought they were weird. I didn't get them. I think also it was me not getting myself, but we can get there in a minute. Um, and then also, just since we're also talking about pets and death and dying, I grew up with a dog named Muffet, and I don't remember being particularly close to this dog, but I do remember like just one day she just wasn't there anymore, and so I was like, I like asked my grandmother, I'm like, so what happened? Like, where's Muffet? Like, there was no conversation
Yeah.
about her dying.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
just wasn't
And
there.
that,
Do you see that? Yeah.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's less common now, but people don't know what to do about it, you know? And then also people don't know how to include children in the equation. And I have worked with families who had young children, and the children were amazing when we asked them to help. And they were like so grounded and so with it. I mean, a lot of us adults can learn from kids if we allow them. We don't want to overexpose children. Say an animal is in visible distress or there are injuries and blood and stuff like that. That is up to the parent and, of course, up to the age of the child. But including children in the journey of the animals, I mean, animals, most of them die before we die. Most of them die if we get them as young animals, die before our kids grow up, you know? So, and I have seen such beautiful things. And if time allows, I can share one story about a family that I worked with very closely. And you can let me know if you want to hear
Yeah,
the
go
story
for
now.
it.
Okay,
Yeah.
because it was a really, really amazing situation. So This was mom who had a dog. At the time of death, Zoe was a big girl. She was 15 years old. Mom had Zoe before she got married, before she had babies. She had two little girls at the time. And they were, at the time of Zoe's death, they were 5 and 7 years old, right? So there is Zoe witnessing her person getting married. She was at the wedding. She was there when the children were born because the children were born in the house. I mean, Zoe was there for all of it. And then eventually, Zoe got old and Zoe got frail, and they were like outdoor families. They took her hiking, etc., etc. And when it became apparent that Zoe was very drastically declining, mom got very anxious. So this was one of my clients. I was accompanying her very, very closely because she wanted to check in. She was worried about her children. And then, I said, look, let's look at things that are in alignment for your family to include your little girls, right? And we were talking through things, and she was like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, you can make choices in how they can participate and help Zoe, right? And then, there were a lot of creative ideas floating around. And if anybody has questions, they can comment somewhere and I get back to them. I don't know, whenever you have a comment section in your podcast. But the short of it is the girls were very actively supporting their dog. And because they were so young, for them, it was just more a matter of fact thing, right? And Zoe, in the end, was euthanized. And then the days leading up, it was scheduled. The family had kind of calibrated what is a good time. I had helped them along the way. I helped their dog a few hours before she passed to kind of calm her system for this transition. And they had done the most amazing thing. And this was like a lot of negotiation between mom and I, and a lot of running ideas by each other. And I had a lot of ideas. And then she was like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So the short of it is the girls made the most beautiful farewell box for their dog. Still get chills. Get chills. And they put things in the box that they thought Zoe might need. Treats, bones, her favorite toy. They found some keys so that Zoe could unlock the door to heaven, right?
Oh,
Drawings for Zoe. I mean, a lot of things, and then just some other things that they wanted Zoe to have, their own little figure toys that, they made a box for Zoe to take to heaven. And it was just like, okay, she needs this, she needs that, and she needs the other stuff, and then she goes to heaven. And then they were with grandpa on the day of the euthanasia because she wanted to really have space with her dog. And I think that was a really good choice, right? And they got Zoe ready and everything. And then they knew what happened. They were with grandpa, and then they came home the next day after Zoe had been euthanized. And then she cremated her dog. And then, like a week or so later, there was a box that arrived in the mail addressed to the girls from Zoe.
oh,
And the box had beautiful paper and it had her ashes, right? And then I saw the 7-year-old at an event, and she said, "You know what happened to my dog?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "So do you want to tell me more?" And she said, "Yeah, she went to heaven, like she went on a trip. But it was just like that. When you're 7 years old, and you're part of it, and she felt really important, and mom took beautiful photos of the girls. And this family did a lot of camping and hiking. And then a few weeks later, they took Zoe's ashes and they made little Native American signposts like wind catchers at Zoe's favorite hiking spots. So they put something in the ground and they sprinkled her ashes. And that is one example that was in alignment with what this family believed. And the kids were like, we are part of this. We are helping Zoe. And that's what I try to instill in mom's anxious mind. And she was like, yeah, we can do this. So we orchestrated this as a team very carefully. And the girls were like, yes, we're helping Zoe. We are helping Zoe, in that box. And then they got this thing literally in the mail. Oh my gosh. They were so excited. And it wasn't sad. It was like we did something and now we go on our favorite hiking trails. And this is where she liked to sit. And I think that is a lesson for many of us. I've also seen children who were very sad. And then we express that. We allow them to express that. But to cut a child off from that, and each family needs to find their own way, not there's no one fits all. But I think children are more wiser and much smarter than we think, especially when we appeal to their nobleness that each soul has to help their
Mhm.
animals.
Well, and if a human
Yeah.
family member had died, you wouldn't keep that from them or keep them away from the
Right.
rituals that take
Yeah.
place. And I think overall too,
Yeah.
it just speaks to, um, which is part of the conversation I really wanted to have today, in that like we aren't necessarily a society that does death, dying, and grieving well, especially for other than humans, like I think we're still not great at
Yeah.
it with humans, but like especially with pets, like I know that was one of the things that I found really challenging was like feeling like being okay with the level of grief that I had. Like I felt like it wasn't okay to be grieving over my cat to the extent that I was, but it was so real. And I actually even had people say, like it's been a couple of months, like you should, like, are you like they were like worried about me because I was still grieving. And it's
Yeah.
like grief has no, like there is no timeline and there's no script on how we grieve. And I did a workshop not too long ago and we were like listing our passions, and one of my passions that I ended up writing that felt really unexpected was this like passion like for death and dying to be done with dignity basically, and then like and like to help people grieve well. And so again, that's like why I want to be having this conversation, because I feel like it's so important. And it's again, like we have the human side, but like the pets and the
Hmm.
animal side, like I feel like they're just such amazing teachers around so many things. But for me, it's really been about like love. And so it's like grief and love. Like as big as your love is, that's how big your grief is probably going to be, right? Would you say that's true, Ute, in your experience?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we tell more stories about animals to make it rationally okay, because most of us can schedule a death with an animal slash euthanasia,
Yeah.
right? And that is an invitation to tell a lot of stories. It's better. We can't do that with humans. We have certain states. I live in a state where we have death with dignity. It's a whole different beast, right? But that is still then the decision in the end of the person and not someone else making the decision for them,
Right.
right? And so, and all of the stuff that is like prevalent in the mainstream culture about companion animals' death is so much blah, 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 blah. And grief is grief, right? It doesn't, it's not different. I mean, you might have different relationships with certain people who pass or certain animals who die, but it's not, oh, there is a grief flavor for people, there's a grief flavor for animals. No, sometimes, it's even stronger. The grief is more powerful with animals because we don't have to do couples counseling with most of them or stuff like that because it's so pure,
Yeah.
and there are much more like a child, as in we lose someone who we took care of, or so we think. I think they take care of us also,
They
but
definitely do. But also the thing, one, I guess it might not be different depending on the relationship, but one of the things that I found different is like they were part of like 90% of my day. So,
yeah, point,
brushing
point.
I like remember so much like a day or maybe 2 days after Nessa died, after she was euthanized. And brushing my teeth and walking out of the bathroom. And normally by that time she would have heard me up. So she would have come to like greet me. And she wasn't there to
Hmm.
greet me. And I like lost. It's just like
Yeah.
these really simple, because it's just like the simple routine everyday things, like if she were alive right now, she'd probably be sitting behind me in this chair or on my desk, like they're
Yeah.
just so ingrained and woven into like the day to day. It's a very different thing than going to visit someone that you love or that you've grown up with.
Yes. Yes, that's a really good point that you're making there. And we talked about this before also, but anything, death and dying can bring up a lot of other emotions that then are tied into that, but that have a different origin. Trauma, past hurt, just emotional stuff that hasn't been fully completed, expressed, lived, acknowledged, you name it. It's a very rich opportunity, not fun necessarily, but for us to look at things and then discern, is that related to the present time situation, our animal died, or is it something that I experienced as a child, or with my partner or whatever, or a family member, right?
Oh yeah, I definitely know. I grieved a lot more than Nessa, but she like
Yes.
that
Yes.
was like the entry point.
Yes, and good for you that you recognize that. Because I think that it's also, there's a lot of denial that happens for people, or, so I think if you have that awareness, that is gold, because then you can really meet yourself in that vulnerable space. It's not a quick kind of, oh, I get through it. I just remembered something that happened to me when I was 10 or so. But it's really amazing that you have that awareness. That's incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I felt like, I don't know, this grieving process just for me, because I'm back up just a little bit, not too much, but Mystery died July 2023, and then Nessa, who was young and seemingly healthy, died December of 2023 and was hospitalized, and it was a whole thing. And in I wasn't really done grieving Mystery by the time things happened with Nessa, and there's also a lot of shock, which we worked on
Yeah.
recently. Thank you. Um, and yeah, so like it was this interesting thing that happened to me in that like that second death ended up being this real, I don't even, breakthrough is the right word, but it was just like my grief was so big that it was like the only thing I really had space for,
Yeah.
which at the time is feels horrible. Like looking back is also beautiful because I couldn't like put my mask on and hide or perform and people please. I just showed up crying and snotting or just whatever it was. I wasn't there for anybody else. Like I could only exist as I was. And so for me, it was really this catalyst to also moving into like loving myself more deeply, and like moving more away from people pleasing and more into authenticity. I'm still working on it, but it feel like it kind of like forced me into that because again, I only had room for my grief. I didn't have room for all the other games that I was like trying to play before she died. And it was also this really huge
Yeah.
wake up call that I wasn't really living myself before they died. You know?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it was somewhat of a sad existence, if you will. And I mean, part of that was in that I was just so happy loving, like their love was enough for me. Like I didn't feel like I needed much outside of like the relationship with Mystery and Nessa, or at least not a lot more than that. Like I just felt so filled up by that. And yeah, there was nothing like catapulting me and like really taking advantage of like living and breathing on this planet at this time and then dying catapulted
Yeah.
into something really
So,
new.
yeah. And so how did that shift things for you? I mean, I was with you during that time, and then we have worked together since. So how would you say has it shifted you? Because there was no way to escape the magnitude, the tsunami experience, as I would describe it, from my vantage point,
Great
where,
way to describe it.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So what would you say has,
so much has shifted. I guess I first want to say that it felt like, people talk about these phoenix cycles all the time. And like I used to talk about them too, like, this death and rebirth cycle. And I
yeah,
feel like I have a completely new perspective of that cycle because for me, I felt like I died when Nessa died. And then I like hunkered down in those ashes for like 11 months, maybe 12 months. I mean, it wasn't this, like when you watch Harry Potter and the Phoenix, right, dies, it like comes right out of those ashes. And I'm like, that has not been my experience. I feel like I'm in the rising process as we
hmm
speak. And it's like as I'm rising, I I'm more confident in who I am and how I am. Like I'm doing a podcast and I'm like talking where normally my default is to hide, to not bring attention to myself, to not use my voice to express myself because I don't want to make myself a target.
mm,
And so that's one way. I also just really trust the messages that I'm getting. So, like, whereas I used to be like, oh, I'm making it up, or I don't know, or I'd like process with a friend, like, what do you think? Does this sound true to you? And like, I don't really need to do that anymore because I just like know it's true for me, and that's all that matters.
yeah,
And so that feels really good. And then I'm starting to understand what people talk about when they talk about like loving yourself in a way that
yeah,
I didn't get before. Like and I used to have this, because I would say like, and I think actually it's probably a lot of people, but my core wound would be around like this abandonment, right? Like if I am Ava in her fullness, then I'm going to be too much for people. They're not going to like me. They're going to abandon me. And then I would also have this loyalty to others instead of loyalty to me. So I'd like die by death by 1,000 cuts because I would hurt
yeah,
myself before I would hurt you.
yeah,
And now I know how to, even though it's hard, I can like speak my truth kindly and directly to someone, but like, like my loyalty is with me first. So it's like I'm not out to hurt anybody, but like I'm going to take care of me first and then whoever is around me rather than like hurting myself to lift someone up or to make sure that, the
mhm,
relationship stays intact. And I feel like also with this loving myself thing, it's like as I, so my crutch or thing that I do right now is I read a lot. I read a lot of fiction on the fantasy smuttier side, to be honest. And so there are times when I probably should be doing other things, but I'm reading. And what I've noticed about that is that if I just love myself in that moment and be like, okay, this is the decision I'm making and it's okay, rather
mhm.
than giving myself a hard time, then I actually move on more quickly
Yes,
than if
yes,
I berate myself and give myself a hard time about it. And so it's like I'm judging myself less, I guess is another way to put that. And I've also
yeah,
noticed that the less I judge me, the less I judge other people. Which I don't know why I didn't get that. I've only gotten that recently, but I'm I'm so excited about it because I don't actually like being judgmental. But yeah, it's more, yeah, I
Yeah.
just see how much it is. It's more about self-judgment. I just talked a lot. Please say things.
Great. It's great. It's so great. Yeah. Well, that was awesome that you shared so much. That was a whole journey. And, I think when people hear this, I say learn as in it takes a while to dig yourself out and you're ready when you're ready.
Yeah,
It can take a while. Everybody's different and also the trigger points are different. But when you're ready, you're ready. And that's how long it takes. That's
exactly.
it.
That's how
You
long
know?
it takes. And I love
Yeah.
that. Like, I felt like, especially when Nessa died, because we were more in touch around her death than mysteries. And it was like the things that I really took away from talking to you were like, don't try to use stories to sort of explain away, like give reason to why she died and all of these things. Like just feel what you're feeling, experience what you're experiencing. And yeah, that there's this sense of yeah, there's no timetable for grieving. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Like we
Exactly.
do it. Um, and yeah, that all just felt, I don't know, just like the permission to be in the experience that I was having just felt really important and really good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is one thing I want to say to whoever is listening, when you go through this, you just described how you dealt with it yourself, and there are also situations where people go into a hardcore depression. And I don't think it's like one or the other, right? But I also want to say to whoever hears this, use tools that feel right to you. Don't just say, oh, it's grief. I heard the podcast and there's a death doula on the podcast and someone who just lost their cats and all of that. But use tools, which is the hardest thing to do when you're in a hole, right? But really look and see, what is it that I need? If it's like reading a novel, if it is talking to a counselor, whatever it might be, getting a massage, you name it, use tools. And sometimes when we're grieving, we don't know what we need. That's when everybody says, oh, let me know if you need anything. And I'm going like, I don't even know where my head is right now when I'm grieving, you
That,
know?
yeah.
Right? And this is for me, it's a bigger conversation about grief, actually. And this is what I also teach in my classes when you do a training with me. It is nice to know that people are there, but when you, as the person who is in it, are in a position to give other people jobs so that they feel important, that can be a burden. I remember I had a situation where I was grieving and then someone called me and said, "How are you?" And I didn't even know what to say. I was just like, "Oh," And then this person said, "Do you want me to bring you dinner?" I'm going like, "Yeah, I had forgotten that I had food in the fridge." It wasn't that I didn't have any food. And then someone just making a suggestion and I could say yes or no.
Yeah.
That was so amazing. A person accompanying, I mean, I do this professionally, but so I'm taking less of like, hey, Ava, how about this? How about that? When I'm working, I'm using you as an example now,
Yeah.
but also when you're in a position being a friend or a loved one, and it's hard to see someone being down and not recover or what we consider recovery. But, and if you want to do sometimes people say are totally hands off. They don't want to talk. They don't want you to be near. And that's hard when you want to really rescue someone from that situation. And there is no rescuing, but you can be there, hold space, and you can suggest things such as, Ava, do you want me to bring you dinner or something like that?
Yeah.
You
Then
know,
not just can I do anything for you, like offer something
let me
specific.
know. You got my number. And I'm like, I won't let you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Say, just based off what you're saying, one of the best things that someone could do or there were just a couple moments where people just sort of asked me about the situation and like my love for Mystery Nessa. And like it was very, when it was the right person, I I don't know, I felt so loved when someone would give me the space to vulnerably share and cry about
Yes.
either what I was experiencing or just about how much I loved them
Okay.
because, like, I could talk all day about how much I loved them, like,
Yeah.
and so,
That's
like,
all.
what a beautiful gift, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And that's a perfect example. I remember when my dog Mila died, which was also a very sudden and intense situation, within 48 hours, things just totally accelerated. And then she passed. And then someone said, "What do you need?" And I said, what I really need is I want to talk about her. I don't need you to do anything for me. I want to talk about her. Do you want to hear? Because I'm thinking about my dog. I'm feeling my dog. And I just let loose. This person was available for that. And for me to just talk and not to get an opinion and I just want to talk about Mila, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and it's different for each of us. And sometimes people say, tell me, and you don't want to talk, or you go like, I can't. So
Yeah.
there are all these flavors. And I guess what I want to hint at is it takes a lot of presence from people surrounding someone who's grieving to not put their own like need to be needed on top of it and all of the things.
Yes.
I've
Yeah.
been guilty of that, so I can speak from experience. You
Mhm.
and eh, so, and that is, like the story that I told you about my client. I made suggestions, but ultimately they figured out what was right for their family.
Right.
You know, the words they used, the vocabulary that they had, how they set everything up, and all of the things that was there. I was inspiring them because I have a lot of examples of how it can work, you know, and I was lucky enough that I got to see this up close and personal, and that they used me as their advisor, if you will, or whatever you call that. So it was pretty amazing. But ultimately, they were empowered to say, oh, we have that much of a bandwidth. We have so much range of things that we can do with our children and our dog. And they also had a really cool cat,
Mhm.
really cool cat who was like the temple guardian when Zoe died. Super cool, super cool.
Oh,
So,
I love that so much.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
wow. Um,
And so, I mean, if I can just allude to another aspect, as you know, I also do animal communication, right? And often when people do sessions with me, when an animal is in hospice or after they have passed, they are concerned, how is the animal doing? Why are some animals retreat when we have like a slow progression, when we have a progression of an illness, not slow, but there's a progression. And then I can say, when we don't feel well, I don't want to be in relationship when I'm changing internally, when I disengage from my connection in the human form or so. And do they know I love them, and I'm worried I'm not doing right by them, all of the things that are totally natural. And when I do these intuitive sessions, our animals are so much more concerned about us than about themselves,
mhm.
because they know how crappy we feel, and
Yeah.
they want to do whatever they can, and that includes that we euthanize them when we can't handle it anymore. Some people cannot stay in that space of anticipation. The people that I work with are pretty cool people in general, in the sense that they are willing to stretch what they think is possible in the right way, in the right way for them. you know um but our animals, they know us better than some of our human friends and partners, and they want to make it okay for us,
Yeah.
even in death. And that to me is the greatest gift and the greatest revelation when I have permission to do intuitive work, you know, and as an addendum to the hospice support that I do, you know.
Yeah. No, and it's so appreciated. I mean, I remember the day before we had Nessa's euthanasia, like in the middle of the night, I finally took some sleep for a couple hours. I made Eric lay on the floor with Nessa. Otherwise, I wouldn't have slept. And I think it would have been around midnight your time. And so you were doing Reiki for us.
Mm.
And then I can't remember, I must have reached out to you. And I think I said, I think she just came home to say goodbye.
Hmm. Yes, you did.
Yeah.
You did.
And then, at 3 a.m., we ended up being on the phone after that. And so it was just my 3 a.m. Obviously, it wasn't your 3 a.m. So
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
bit
I
different.
remember.
But
Hmm.
um, yeah, that was so, meaningful that you could like have that space with her and with me and with Eric, because I think you did Reiki for all of us.
Yeah.
um, and I probably could have given more space before her euthanasia, but I personally I was sleep deprived. We've been on this 10-day journey of just a lot of hard things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it was so hard. And I feel like for me personally, again, like she probably had a very different experience than I did of her end of life journey. And a year and some later, we did a spirit session with her. And um, it was just so helpful to hear, more of what she needed to do, basically,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and that I didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because yeah, it's hard
Yeah.
not to have that guilt, when you are not allowing death to naturally occur, when you are going a euthanasia route.
Yeah.
Um, And we actually just this weekend also worked on, as you called it, we did some psychic surgery around the shock that I went through and how I was, holding on to her. And I feel a lot lighter since we did that. And so, yeah, I don't know, we walked through this process together in so many different ways. And I'm just really, really grateful. And I feel like I've learned so much about pets and the dying process, the euthanasia process, and the grief process, which I also just want to make sure that we leave with mentioning, Ute and I are both, you're hearing us say euthanasia a lot. We're not saying anything about putting anybody down. I just wonder, Ute, if you want to like speak to that a little bit, because I do think it's really important, actually. Like, you were
Yeah.
the first one to sort of educate me on that, and it was just like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. You mean the verbiage, especially that,
Yeah, the
okay.
verbiage.
It's one of my pet peeves. So that's the common way of talking about euthanasia. I had to put my dog down, and I'm like, we would never talk about a human like that. So my animals die. I don't put anyone down. It's also not all up to me, right? So what I'm trying to say is there is a joint decision. They're not humans. And a lot of animals require and request assistance. So I call it like assisted death also. But I'm not putting anyone down. I'm not that arrogant. It's also, I'm not that in control. I have a credit card that I use to pay. I make a phone call, right? But it is really, in the end, that sounds kind of weird, but it is in a way a joint decision. And sometimes, like with my own dog, who also died very dramatically and very suddenly, she wasn't that young and there were issues that I was aware of, right? And she literally died on the day when I wanted to do a whole round of diagnostics. And she was like, no, I'm done. Bye. And I mean, it wasn't fun for me at all. Um, but that was her choice point. That was her choice point, and she would have been in agonizing pain had she hung on any longer, right? I just saw it from the outside because, as many of you know, our cats and dogs, they conceal, discomfort, because in the wild, you don't run around go like, oh, I have a headache. Oh, I gotta lie down, bring me the meat from the mouse that you caught or something like that. That doesn't happen, right? So I want to just encourage everybody who hears this, try to use different words that are not as condescending, and it's not, nobody does it on purpose. It's just how we're trained to talk. And I'm like, ugh, you know,
Yeah.
they die, and most of our companion animals die with assistance, and some of it is due to because that's considered the more humane option. And in my household, I had animals die naturally, and I had animals die with euthanasia. And also, I didn't let them suffer. They were just these moments where they were like, no, I'm done and I'm doing it on my own. And I was like, okay, you know, it's really not about my agenda. It's about being present. And sometimes when we're in the thick of it, it's really hard to be present, because
Yes.
it's just, you're exhausted and you have all these emotions, and you might remember other things that make you sad, and that's when it can be super helpful to have an ally who is neutral but compassionate, where you can kind of let it hang out and get some more pointers and insights and support, really, and
Yeah.
validation, you
No,
know.
I definitely needed that, and I was so thankful to have you, yeah,
Mhm.
as that death doula companion for me. 'Cause,
Awesome.
yeah, I was so in it, so in my own anxiety and worry and just all the things that
Which is understandable, by the way. You know,
totally,
it's completely
yeah.
understandable.
And
You sound
sleep deprived and not eating, all of those things,
good. Yeah,
You, yeah, you almost at that point you do. You really need an outside, yeah, neutral
yeah,
party who knows this journey.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so it's, I definitely, and again, like we're gonna outlive most of the animals that come into our lives. Death is coming for us all. Like this is just part of the process. And so, yeah, having someone there to support you, like Ute, I highly, highly recommend it. And even before, it gets to that point, like I know it was really helpful with Mystery because, she had breast cancer. So we had a little bit more of a jump on preparing as much as you can prepare for any
Yes.
death.
Yeah.
But like you had really great recommendations on even just like being aware of like the emergency vet hospitals in the area. So if something did happen, like you know where to go, like you have a plan.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like having different like herbs or medicines for things that might happen, things like that. Like all of that was so helpful. And so with Nessa, it was a very different situation because she just went from okay to not okay and in the hospital. But yeah, there's still just so much that we can, that we can do when we have that time, and that we can, like you said, like make things more comfortable, or even having a better understanding of the euthanasia process. Like I would say if that is the route that you and your animal decide to go, do it in your home if you can. I don't know if you have a different recommendation, but
No, no, not at all. Not
we
at
did
all.
we did both girls here, and
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And depending on where you live, if you can have that information before you're in the hot zone.
yes.
No, because I know in my region who is available. I just had a client the other day, and they were like, there is one 24-hour service. They said she called me in the morning, right? She said they cannot come out until 9 at night, and her animal was very distressed. And I gave her two others. I said, also 24 hours, call them too, you know? Call them too. And then she got another service. They were available earlier, and it was just right to not wait that long because the animal was in severe distress, you
Yeah.
know, like
And then,
really.
yeah. And then the other thing I would offer too is, if you have other animals, to let them be around and even potentially have some time with the body afterwards too. Like I know.
That's what,
Yes. Yeah.
we also have this idea, oh, they probably do this. And I had animals who were like, yeah, I don't care. Do your thing. They were in the house, do your thing, you
Yeah.
know? And with one of my dogs, my little Pablo, who is still with me, he was completely distraught. He tried to wake up the dead body, so I had
Mm,
my dog Toddy. And then when
okay.
Mila died, Pablo, he was used to Mila being gone for a whole day because she had like 3 or 4 times a year, she had a full day procedure that we had to do at the vet clinic. So she was gone, so on occasion she was gone for all day and she came back and she's like, oh, there's my wife again. Oh. And I he was with me in the emergency hospital and all of the things, but it hit him weeks later. I think he thought he was on a vacation from his annoying nah, nah, nah. Because he could be a little bit pushy, and they got along really well. But and he was like, okay, I'm fine. I'm like, okay, so you're taking this really easy. And then about 3 weeks later, and it happens for some of us too. It's delayed grief,
Yeah.
That's when in some way, somewhere in his psyche, he realized she's not gonna come back. And
Mm,
he really went into depression. He stopped eating and I knew what that meant, and I thought, okay, so this is like, and because it was a shocking situation, he might have thought that, oh yeah, she's just at the vet clinic. Thank goodness I have my mom to myself, right? So
yeah.
it's not predictable, but I can say when your animals act differently, it's not random. It's never random. And sometimes they can be more needy or more vocal or just do weird things, and weird to us, not for them. And yeah, so grief can look kind of many different faces, I would say.
Yeah. Human or animal. And I think if there's anything, yeah, to take away from this overall conversation is that, yeah, like grief doesn't look any one way for
Yeah.
any being. And so if you're ever in a space where you are grieving, to just really honor whatever is there for however long it's there.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to say one more thing that I find really important. Sometimes people say, how can you do this work? Do animal communication at the end of life, being a pet death doula. And I'm like, I can do it because I love doing it. I really do. But also my connection is not interrupted. It's different. And I'm grieving too, right? But the connection I have with my animals is never interrupted. The connection I have with your cats, because they're now my remote children, if you will, it's not interrupted either, you know? And you don't have to be part of a church, It's just that connection is not interrupted. It's just different and it's harder initially for many of us. But yeah, without feeling, it's not that I believe. I feel that connection. Without that, I wouldn't do this work.
Yeah.
That's it, you
Yeah.
know?
Death is, it's not an end, it's a transition, it's a transformation
Yes.
for sure.
Yes. It absolutely is. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so before we go, do you want to, I mean, you've talked about a little bit about what you do throughout, but do you want to share a bit about the work that you do specifically with animals?
Yes. So, in short, I'm an animal communicator and I'm a pet death doula. And my favorite way to work is with anybody who wants to understand the animals better. They don't have to be old. So I work with a lot of old animals, but I also work with young animals who are misunderstood or people go like, why are they doing what they're doing? So anybody who wants to elevate their connection, I'm happy to work with. And I can assure you right from the get-go, I'm on your pet's team. I love you too, but I'm the advocate for the animal, as in translation service, spiritual translation service, if you will, right? And then I also offer workshops. I do once a year, I do a pet hospice and death doula training that's coming up in June. So there are many, many ways that I can support a family or a person with an animal. And the goal is that we really have a more enlightened connection and elevate the game and really know they are brilliant, they're intelligent, they have wisdom to impart on us, and we just got to translate it into our so that we get it into our human brain. And that's a little bit about what I do in a nutshell. I have a lot of tools in my toolkit, and I won't talk about all of these tools. That can get boring. People can look that up on my website if they want to. But, I love what I do, and I love being a conduit for these messages that we receive so that humans understand animals better and also appreciate the
Yeah.
messages that they get.
And I can tell you, like I said, I've done her human and all of her animal offerings, so I've done non-sick animal communication. So like Steffi, Steffi is one. We
Yes.
fostered her, and then she decided, because I didn't think I was ready for any more animals, but Steffi, my current cat, she decided that she was going to adopt me is really the way to put it, I think. And so, we talked to Ute just to be like, hey, like what can I do to like help her have a better life? It's just like you know,
Yeah.
how do we have a great connection? It can be as simple as that. And, you can take the harder stuff to her too. And if the workshop, the death doula workshop piques your interest at all, but maybe you have a younger pet, I encourage you to, take the leap anyways, because I didn't because I thought my pet was young. I think it was happening probably after Mystery and before Nessa died or something like that. And I was like, oh, I don't need it. And it was fine. Everything worked out perfectly. And it would have been really nice to have that information under my belt
Yeah.
going,
Yeah.
moving through her death. And so it ended up being a place for me to process both of their deaths a little more deeply, and like,
Mm.
learning these practical things, and all the beautiful things that you bring to that workshop. But just to say, you don't have to have an elderly pet to do the death
Correct.
doula workshop. So I highly recommend it. And like I said, it is just awesome, and
Thank you.
something that was so seemingly unbearable, she made more bearable. So I really appreciate your support through my
Oh,
journey with my girls.
thank you. Thank you. It's
All
an honor.
right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody.
Bye.